many people in the diabetes world labeled it as bad because fruit bad because it has fructose in it. So can you just go into the confusion there around, fructose in fruit versus processed foods?
Yeah, critical point. So I want to start, Robbie, with the punchline. And the punchline is large studies by some of the best in the business, like Frank Hugh, who's now the chair of nutrition at the Harvard School of Public Health. 100,000 people followed for decades. More intake of whole fruit, less diabetes. More intake of whole fruit, better glycemic control in diabetes. Whole fruit is friends of people with diabetes. It's friends of people who want to avoid diabetes. It's a friend to health, period, end of story. That's really true. And I see a number of them behind you on the shelf. So that's a good thing. And yet, the fruit contains fructose. So what's going on? Well, first of all, it's diffused throughout the matrix of the whole fruit. It's at a low concentration. It's packaged along with fiber. It's packaged along with antioxidants. And really the net effect of eating a whole food is the net effect of eating the whole food. It's not what one isolated nutrient does. I think people with good intentions unfortunately became subject to the law of unintended consequences. So Rob Lustig, who's a pediatric endocrinologist at University of California, San Francisco, had a YouTube video in which he talked about sugar as toxic and fructose in particular as a poison that went viral, and he's written books about it. And he's quick to say, I don't mean whole fruit. I mean fructose used as a sweetener. And in particular, he's referring to sucrose. By the way, standard table sugar, sucrose is a mix of glucose and fructose. So it's 50% fructose. So he's talking about that, just sugar, added sugar. But he's also talking about high fructose corn syrup, which generally is about 55% fructose. Not a big difference there. They're more alike than different, but a little bit more fructose with high fructose corn syrup. That's what he was talking about. But unfortunately, if you say fructose is poison or toxic, and everybody knows that fruits contain fructose, it's hard to think, well, this food is good for me even though it's a delivery vehicle for a poison. So I think we can understand how the law of unintended consequences kicked in. Many people got the very misguided notion that they should avoid fruit. And by the way, Robbie, this is not the first time that happened. So lately, the focus has been on fructose. But you know what it was on before, caused the same problem? The glycemic index. Glycemic index, which was invented by a good friend of mine, Dr. David Jenkins at the University of Toronto, was never intended as a reason people should avoid fruit or should avoid carrots and certain vegetables. But a lot of popular books were written, including one called The GI Diet, that told people the same thing. Avoid fruit, it has a high glycemic index. So we've made the same mistake, under different banners before. Dr. Hughes' work, the work of others who have looked at large populations and major intervention trials consistently have shown the higher the intake of whole fruit in your diet, the better the glycemic control if you have diabetes, the less the risk of diabetes if you don't, the better your chances at avoiding weight gain, the better your chances at avoiding chronic disease. So, again, your best friends in the food supply include fruit, along with vegetables, whole grains, beans, lentils, nuts, seeds, and again, plain water for thirst. And then just to close out the discussion, Robbie, so again, we've got this issue of table sugar versus high fructose corn syrup. This is a story that's played out over decades. And there are a couple of important considerations. First, it's very inexpensive to manufacture high fructose corn syrup from corn. And that's why it's so prevalent in the food supply. Very cheap, readily available, subsidized corn, a quick enzymatic process in a lab to make high fructose corn syrup, sweeten everything with it. And we've already talked about why big food is interested in sweetening everything with something, because it stimulates your appetite center and makes you eat too much, which is bad for you, but good for people selling the food, right? So they want to put some kind of sweetener in everything, and the cheaper that sweetener, the better. Welcome to the world of high fructose corn syrup in everything. But the other reason for high fructose corn syrup in everything is because if we go back about 15 years, people really were getting the memo. This was the era of the glycemic index diets and so forth. People were getting the memo that too much sugar is bad. And everybody was aware of the name sugar. People didn't yet really know the name high fructose corn syrup. So what I was seeing back then, 15, maybe 20 years ago, is a lot of food labels were including added sugar as high fructose corn syrup, probably counting on people not recognizing it. So, you know, even people trained, look for added sugar. They looked for the word sugar, didn't see it, and thought, well, I guess this is okay. Now it's actually done a 180. Now people have been trained high fructose corn syrup is worse than sugar. Avoid that. But that opens us up to yet another vulnerability. So, for example, Pepsi, among others, took their product, which had been sweetened with high fructose corn syrup, switched it back to sucrose, and thought that would put a halo over them. Hey, look what we've done. It's so great. Now, you know, we've taken out the high fructose corn syrup. Aren't we terrific? No, that's a sideways move. And again, by way of reminder, high fructose corn syrup generally has about 55% fructose, 45% glucose. Table sugar is 50-50. If that sounds like a small difference to you, you're right. Are they the same? No. Can our bodies tell them apart? Yes. Is the net effect on health very different? No. Net effect on health is about the same, and really what matters is too much of either.
Brilliant. It's brilliant. You know, the more that I hear about food manufacturers and the sort of tricks that they play with consumers, the more I get really frustrated with them.
Me too. No, Cyrus, absolutely. And I want to throw one more thing in the mix. So Michael Moss is a Pulitzer Prize-winning investigative journalist. I love his work. His book is called Salt, Sugar, Fat. He has a new one either out now or due out imminently called Hooked, about how the food companies hook us. But what I'd like to commend to the audience is a New York Times Magazine cover story. It's available online to anybody. It's entitled The Extraordinary Science of Addictive Junk Food. So in that article, which anybody can pull up on the web, Michael Moss describes how all of the major food companies hire teams of scientists. So we're talking about a bunch of highly trained people with PhDs, gives those teams functional MRI machines, so the best tech in the business, and marching orders to design food the average person cannot stop eating. So, you know, here we are, doctors like me, guys like you, trying to promote public health, giving people good advice, but they go out into a world that is literally booby-trapped to make that advice fail them. Don't eat too much, make the right choices. But, you know, again, we've got really smart people being paid bonuses if they can make junk food addictive. It's crazy. And Michael Moss published that New York Times Magazine cover story just a few years ago, but 10 years before that, there was a 4-part expose in the Chicago Tribune that told the same story. In fact, at that time, a team of investigative journalists discovered that Philip Morris, a tobacco company, and Kraft, North America's biggest food company, were corporate cousins, both held by Altria, their parent company at the time. And scientists from Philip Morris and Kraft were working together, sharing the functional MRI machine. The tobacco scientists' marching orders were put flavorants in cigarettes that get young kids hooked. And the food scientists' marching orders were combine flavors in a way where people cannot stop eating. You know, when they told us, bet you can't eat just one, they weren't kidding around. That was a threat. Okay, so I agree with you. I mean, it gets you angry, right? Well, I think you should be angry. I think I should be angry. And my question is, why are we not angry as a culture? Why isn't every loving parent or grandparent angry that as we try to defend ourselves and our children from the slings and arrows of outrageous epidemiologic misfortune, type 2 diabetes, other chronic disease, the food supply is rigged to make our efforts to get to health nearly impossible? Where is the outrage? I mean, we've gotten that memo in the New York Times Magazine. We got that memo in the Chicago Tribune. What are we waiting for? And you know, we could wait for the government to fix it. I don't see that happening anytime soon. But if enough of us say, this is outrageous, it's hard enough to get to health in the modern world, we will not stand for a food supply that is rigged to profit at the expense of the health of our children. We will not stand for it. I get to the podium, I feel like a preacher, you know, fire and burns. I want righteous indignation. Anyway, I'm with you, brother. It makes me angry. It's outrageous.
I just gotta say, I love what you're saying so much. I mean, I read the book Endable Reading by David Kessler many years ago, and he's talking about the food stuff. And people would say, don't you like miss these certain foods? And it's like, no, like those people are tricking me. Like I have a certain level of pride. Like there's no way I'm gonna eat that stuff. They spent billions of dollars to try and mess with my brain. Like no way.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And David's, it was great as the FDA commissioner. He was actually our dean of medicine at Yale for a while. He and I are friends. Yeah, it's a terrific book as well. So yeah, I mean, how many times do we need to get this memo before we rise up, again, as a public comprised of people people connected to other people, parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles. I mean, we all care about one another. We all have reason to say, look, I don't want a nanny state. I don't want the government telling me what I can have for breakfast, but I don't want the food industry run amok and allowed to pay scientists bonuses for making my breakfast addictive. That's crazy. I can't defend against that. That's just not fair. So I've been waiting 15 years to see us put an end to this with popular righteous indignation. But the problem, Robbie, is we get angry at all the wrong things. So we go completely crazy about fructose and stop eating fruit, as opposed to saying, willful manipulation of the food supply, adding things to it to make food addictive. That's what I want to rail against. Fruit is not the problem here, but we've got some serious problems, and we ought to get serious about dealing with them. And again, it makes me very angry and frustrated because I've been working at this my entire career, and it's not obvious we're winning this war yet.